Welcome to the Interior Analysis Podcast, where we analyze screenplays in depth. I'm Evan Westman.
I'm Carla Cortez.
And today we're going to be analyzing Nightcrawler. So we've decided we're going to alternate who picks which movies we do. This is mine, so I'm going to be kind of leading this one a little more.
Yep,
Next one's going to be, I'll let you
Yeah.
introduce that.
No, you're fine. So basically, in certain episodes, I've picked movies, and so has Evan. So in certain episodes, we're going to be kind of dominating whichever ones we picked, and this first one is Nightcrawler, which is Evan's pick.
Yeah, and so far we've figured out we haven't actually seen, the other one hasn't seen any of the ones that we've picked, I guess. Mm-hmm. That was a really bad way of saying that. But basically, one of us is going to always be coming in with a clean slate, and one of us is going to have known this movie for a while and done some research on it already.
Yeah.
For pretty much at least the first four, I think. So, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to do a quick plot summary of the movie, and then we're going to go into three topics and themes and techniques that are used in writing it. So the first one is going to be revealing the character of Lou through his relationships with the minor characters, the theme of crime news culture, and then the technique that Dan Gilroy uses of revealing character through action. So also on that note, spoiler warning for this and all episodes, we are going to spoil everything. So if you haven't seen it, probably want to stop listening because you won't get most of what we're talking about, and also we're going to ruin it for you, and you should also just go watch it because it's a good movie. So did you have any initial thoughts from it? How'd you feel about it from watching it, because this was your first time seeing it?
Yeah, so this was my first time. I get the appeal. I understand. I get it. Jake Gyllenhaal, but I don't know. It's not really... I wouldn't say it was my favorite, which is hilarious because this is our first episode, and I'm like,
Well, that might make for some good counterpoints, because I have a lot of good things to say about it, a couple of gripes, but that might give kind of voice to some people who might be listening to this who want us to rip it apart.
I think it was a smart movie. I think it was definitely a smart movie, and a lot of the ways that things were filmed, the way that he was saying certain things, even his facial expressions were very revealing of the situation and of the character.
Yeah, it was surprising. I'd seen this 3 years ago, and I forgot how engaging it was to watch.
Yeah.
After reading the screenplay, it's actually I don't know, something about the way it's directed. I'm not that well versed in directing techniques, since I'm more into the writing side of things, but something about the way Dan Gilroy filmed this was just really engaging. Mm-hmm. So even if we'll link to the screenplay so you can read that as well.
Yeah.
So one quick note, if this is the first screenplay you're reading, know that this is not how most of them are written. In a lot of ways, this is a very non-conventional writing, but I think it's not bad that this is the first one, because this screenplay was nominated for an Oscar, so we can say right off the bat that you don't need to follow rules. We're not going to be one of those kinds of podcasts or screenwriting guru people that say follow these rules and get your movie made.
Yeah. All right. Summary?
Yeah, so we're going to do quick plot summary. Hopefully quick. So we first see Lou, security guard, catches him cutting up a fence, and Lou steals the guy's watch. He goes to a scrapyard, sells some metal, tries to get a job from a guy. The guy says no. Later that night, he comes across a crash, sees the stringers at work. He meets Joe, the other Nightcrawler guy. We go to the next morning. Lou's at home watching news. He steals a bike and sells it for a police radio. That night, he's doing his first stringer job. He kind of messes up a bit, but he gets some footage. He goes to KWLA. He meets Nina. She leads with his story and praises his eye. Next day, he's kind of looking up some stuff, getting more into the world of stringer work. He hires Rick, and then we see him with Rick that night. There's kind of some conflict between them. Lou's doing a little better, but he still messes up a bit since it's only his second night. Nina's continues to be impressed by his work. So then there's a montage of Lou and Rick doing some stringer jobs. He's getting better at it. Then we do like a full scene where Lou beats Joe to like a crime scene. Then we go to that night. He sells the thing to Nina, asks her to dinner, and then we don't really see her say yes, but she does, I guess. Mm-hmm. So then right after that, Joe offers Lou a job. Lou says no in his very specific fashion. Then there's a dinner with Nina. After that, Joe beats Lou to a couple scenes with his like new Vans. And then Nina's upset with Lou for not getting like the good story of the night. Next day, Lou tampers with Joe's van, and then that night he and Rick film Joe's crash. Then later that night, there's the big story that kind of drives that second half of the movie. Lou beats the police to a home invasion. He brings it to Nina, but he cuts out some like useful evidence for the police first. Lou says like, "What if the story's not over?" He kind of keeps her on the hook. Next day, the detectives come to Lou's house. He gives him an edited tape, and then he goes and starts the night with Rick. He tells them we're going to track down the criminals and like film a big arrest because this is going to be a huge story. So they pretty much do that. They go find the criminals, follow them to a restaurant. Lou calls the cops, and then he gets Rick to go out and film them, even though Rick doesn't want to. So then they film the gunfight and the ensuing car chase and the crash. And then Lou gets Rick to go film the criminal. The criminal shoots him, and Lou gets it on film. So then he brings the video to KWLA. It's like an amazing story that's going to cement his career. After that, the detectives question Lou, but they can't find him guilty. And then we cut to like some indefinite time later where Lou has 2 vans and 3 interns. He's living his dream and running a successful TV news business. And then we see him like go off into the night and the end. Okay, so yeah, that was pretty much a plot summary. So our first topic is revealing character through the relationships with the minor characters. So the 3 minor characters are Nina, which is kind of Lou's superior, Rick, who's his subordinate, and Joe, who's his rival. So this is kind of covering like the 3 business relationships that he has.
Yeah. So something that was interesting before we get into the whole thing was that at the beginning of the movie, everyone was a terrible person to Lou. Like, everyone was just mean to Lou no matter what.
Yeah,
until Nina came into the picture and was like, no, like, we're using him. We're, like, using this footage. So, I don't know.
That's fair to say. Like, that's
Yeah.
I don't think that's a fair point, because like it starts off there's kind of like some sympathy for Lou. This is like there's some other analyses that I've listened to that like have talked about this, where like Lou's an awful person, but we don't really see that right away. Like, we get some time to sort of get on his side, so that we're like, okay, we're invested in him, and then we get invested in him in like the way we're invested in like a great villain, where we're like waiting to see what's he gonna do next.
Yeah.
So I don't think like that's not like a.
It's interesting how and I feel like that, like you're saying, like that definitely was on purpose, because you definitely wanna get the audience kind of hooked and be like, oh, like the underdog, like we're rooting for him, and then in the end you're like, we shouldn't have rooted for him at all.
Yeah, but it's also that's who Lou is. He's a really polite person. This is kind of some things that I covered in some topics that we're not going to talk about today, but he's all about being professional and doing things for like to like be polite and make people like him. At least when that serves him. And at the beginning of the movie, that's pretty much his one goal, is like get a job. So he's like playing up his politeness and professionalism like to an 11, basically.
It's almost psychopathic, almost.
It is. Well, I mean, it's I think pretty much anyone who sees this agrees that Lou's a sociopath.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like. It's not shy about that.
Exactly.
Okay, so
Nina.
Yeah. So first character we're going to talk about is Nina, who's Lou's kind of superior. So he starts off being like really polite to her, because she can kind of get him to elevate him in like the world of crime news and being a stringer. We see right away that like they could be allies with each other. Their views align. Like, his first story, she's like, we should be running packages like this every day. So there's like an immediate alliance between them. they have respect for each other's like tenacity and willingness to get results, and like they don't really care about ethics or whether it's what they're doing is like legal or not, just as long as it makes for like awesome TV. So that's and in the end of the movie, I guess this will probably be touched on a little bit more later, but at the end, like they're the two characters who have that attitude, and they're the two who come out on top compared to everyone else. So as the movie goes on, though, he does become less polite and like more blunt with her. Once he realizes that he doesn't need to impress her to maintain a professional relationship, he stops trying to. So the big scene between them is obviously the dinner scene. So this was kind of I feel like when I saw this, so it was a while ago when I first saw this, but I think that was the point where I was like, oh, like I kind of stopped rooting for Lou. I was like, oh man, he's not okay.
Well, he basically tried to threaten her and like was very controlling during that whole dinner where she was just like, you know, and the interesting thing is that she was caught off guard and so was the audience. Yeah. I think all of us simultaneously felt what she felt in the moment of being like, wait, what is happening right now?
I would definitely agree with that. And like here, one thing that like I'm a little bit confused about that scene because like, I mean, most of Lou's motives throughout the movie are professional. He's like doing things to get ahead. So in this scene, I'm just wondering like, is he trying to use sex to gain power, or is he trying to use his power to get laid? And I kind of have to say, I think it's the latter, because Nina clearly doesn't want to. He's not going to get anything out of, like, she's not going to give him anything from that. So I think mostly that scene is to, like, have him feel like I'm getting ahead and exercising control over Nina.
Yeah, and I also think, like, he definitely is just so fact-based and like removes his feelings from everything. Like even from the beginning, it's all facts. It's all like about what's on paper, you know. And like
he like reads from a textbook basically. Exactly. In most of his maybe not most, but a lot of lines feel like they came out of some textbook.
And they're robotic. He's a robot basically who's just following the rules. And I think he was just so disillusioned that in the work field, like in any type of work field, especially in news and like on television, you have to sleep your way to the top.
Yeah, you know? That's something that I think is definitely part of that. Like, I think he thinks that's a conventional box to tick. Exactly. Like he's not like he's doing it because he feels like that's what you do.
And it falls apart. It falls apart when he doesn't get the plane crash lead or.
Well, no, I wouldn't say that it does. I think that's just. Really? I think this scene sets that up because in that moment, so like. The entire dinner scene, he breaks down Nina's facade. She's like, I don't need you to keep my job. And he's like, yeah, you do. Because, he's not employed by anyone. She's employed by the station, and he knows, like, okay, this is, like, your tenure's running up, like, you've only been at one station for 2 years, and, like, you're, like, this is, like, the last week. So, in that moment, she's like, she needs him more than he needs her. He could go to another station. He chooses not to, and I think he does that. Maybe not initially, but he probably stays with KWLA and stays with Nina because he knows she's the one who's going to be easiest to control. Right. So he can get job security from it.
But I'm talking about the like. Remember when he just got I think it was a stabbing, was it I can't on Corona.
Oh yeah, that scene.
That's what I'm talking about. Like
that's the scene I'm talking about too.
It like the thread kind of loosens. You know what I mean? Like it. Like he thought like his plan was perfect. Like with like sleeping with her, which we don't. Which even in your we don't know if they actually do.
Well, there is an implication. But it's hardly touched on at all. Which like I think is kind of curious. I think it's okay that they do that because it's kind of more about him asking and like exercising that power. Like I don't think we needed to see whether that went anywhere. And honestly, like it never seems to affect their relationship that much after that scene. Like he brings it up once in like at the end of like a big monologue to basically suggest that like basically that happened, but it's not. They don't make a big deal out of it at all, which is. Like weird. I'm not totally. I don't really have a good answer for why they might have done that. aside from maybe to not distract from like the rest of the story. But aside from that, yeah, I'm not really sure why they decided not to go anywhere with that.
Was it Corona? No.
It was. So that was the scene after. I don't know if that scene was so much about their like relationship. That was more about, because that was the scene after. So Joe offered him the job,
right?
And he's like, I've got this second van, and that scene was like he and Rick went to one scene. Joe beat them to it,
right.
And then he was like, I got this, and there was like two bigger stories that night that Joe got. So, and Lou didn't. So, that was kind of more about like pushing him over the edge of like going to sabotage Joe's van. Right. At least that's what I think. Like, not that Nina's not important in that scene, but not quite as much, maybe.
Right. I think it was just to help like shift, like, because everything was going so well for Lou, and then like I think that scene was just to kind of be like, oh, there's a switch to things not going well anymore, and then him having to step up his game.
Yeah, he had to. Well, I don't know if you could call that stepping up his game, but yes, I mean that's I mean it's definitely consistent with the way he steps up his game in other parts of it. Okay, so that's pretty much all the notes I have for Nina. Yeah, so let's move on to Rick. So this is his subordinate, and I think this is like, there is something that I've heard in like, maybe not business culture, but you hear like you can tell someone's character by the way they treat their superiors, and that's definitely true of Lou and the way he treats Rick. So like the first scene, so he's offering him a job, and it's really easy to get, actually. Like, Rick needs no qualifications to get this.
Yeah, we don't even see how he found him too, which I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, there's like a suggestion that there's some ad, but Rick's like, it didn't really say what the ad was.
Exactly.
Which is like, but I think that's that's pretty intentional, I think, by Lou's part. He's not, like, he's looking for someone who needs a job and just needs a job, like he did. So he, like, I think he knows what that feels like. Right. And he knows that Rick is not gonna flake on him because Rick needs this job.
Right.
Like, enough that he'll basically, I think he says, like, I'll pretty much do anything, so hire Rick, which is exactly what Lou's looking for, because it's like, Lou, like, he can get Rick to do anything. And I think even, like, making the job easy to get is kind of going to extend that, like, honeymoon period with Rick, because Rick might think, oh, this is, like, easy to get, it's going to be easy to do, he's going to be an easy boss, which is not true. And he doesn't even offer Rick money initially. Rick has to be like, I need money. And even what he gives him is like, it's like $30 a night. That has to be way below minimum wage.
Yeah,
like,
no, of course.
It's a complete ripoff. Like, you figure they're doing like 8 hours a night. So that's what, like less than $4 an hour.
Exactly.
And Rick's basically homeless, and like Lou gets plenty of money. So
no,
it's
and,
not
and
like
Lou
he couldn't.
knows that, and he takes advantage of it.
Right, so he's looking for someone to basically be his tool. Like, Rick is completely replaceable to him, and I mean we completely see that at the end. At the end, yeah. And even throughout, like Lou basically tells Rick exactly how to do his job. He's like, "Why didn't you tell me that this traffic thing's better?" And Rick's like, "Well, if you already knew the traffic was like easier this way, why didn't you just go that way?"
Exactly.
So, and I think he needs Rick around for other things, but here's one thing that so the big climax of their relationship basically is Lou lets Rick die for the story. And I would question, like, do you think he would have killed Rick himself if that opportunity hadn't, like, presented itself? Like, he kind of does one worse, because he lets Rick die and uses his death for profit, which is, like, I think that's Shit. Worse. Yeah. Yeah. But that was, like, within probably an hour of Rick asking for the raise, which is, like, how Lou justifies it. He's like, you use my bargaining power, like, so this is, like, justice or whatever. I don't know if it's justice, but whatever. Right. That's his justification. But do you think he would have killed Rick later on, or at least fired him? I think he probably would have killed him instead of fired him.
Really? That's interesting, because when I read that note, I actually did think about this, and I don't think he would have, only because he's smart and he knows that he probably would have gotten caught. And I think that is the only reason he wouldn't have killed Rick, because he would never put himself in a position like that. Because imagine, he works for a news like station. Like, of course, like, you know what I mean? Like, he knew that, like, I don't know. I feel like he's way too smart to just be like, okay, I'm gonna kill this kid, because also he doesn't care. He doesn't care about Rick. He doesn't even care enough to kill him.
Yeah, that's no. I would argue that like killing Rick is a better business decision than firing him, because I mean Rick basically by the end of the movie, Rick's like, you're a terrible person. I would think Rick probably would have quit after that night, or at least strongly considered it. So if he had let Rick go, Rick is like kind of a reference for him now. So if anyone else, like, I mean, I guess Los Angeles is a big city, so it's unlikely, but it is possible that like if Lou hired a replacement and they ran into Rick, he'd be like, oh no, get out.
Yeah.
Like, which would be bad. So I think he could have I think Lou could have killed Rick in a way. I mean, he basically does, but he could have killed Rick in a way that wouldn't have gotten him caught.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Even without the situation at the end.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Look, we have a disagreement.
Yeah, well, that's
our first
that's
disagreement.
Good. Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it, because I mean, in the end, Rick died, and that was the story, aka like what Lou won. You know,
and
he
like
wanted a big story.
And on another note too, like this is very much Dan Gilroy has said, like, I see this as a success story, like and we'll touch on this a little more in like the next topic, but he says, like, the tragedy isn't that Lou does these things. The tragedy is that we have created a system where someone like Lou gets rewarded for these sorts of things. Like, he does all these immoral and, like, terrible things, but he comes out on top. And I think that's meant to parallel, like, a lot of business tycoons, like someone like Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or someone like that. And, I mean, in those businesses, this is kind of a sensationalized version of it. But, I don't think it's that far. Like, so in this business, like, he has more of an opportunity to like directly put Rick in danger through like the motivation of getting ahead. But it's not that different. Like, I mean, I'm sure in other corporate contexts, there's a lot of CEOs and people who like put other people in danger below them that helps them like get ahead in the business world. So I mean, not knowing a whole lot about the business world, like I can't really speak to that so much in how he treats Rick compared to the way that's like conventional, but it feels grounded in that, even if it is a little sensationalized. All right, so last minor character is Joe. So Joe is his rival. Yeah, and I like, so here's something that I think is interesting. Like, Lou basically does the same thing to Joe as he does to Rick, but it doesn't feel as bad. And I think mostly that's because, like, Joe's an annoying character. Like,
so annoying.
He is, like, that's basically what Bill Paxton is. Like, if you remember in Aliens, he's the guy who, like, he's the Marine who, like, just complains the entire movie. That's the same actor. So I don't know if Bill Paxton's been in anything else, but he kind of has a track record for, like, being good at playing annoying people. And Joe is no exception. Like, Joe's just like, like, if you look at the way he talks, it's like he's like trying to be a frat boy at like 50 a little bit.
Gosh. How he says bruh.
Yeah.
I'm like, dude, it's way past your time.
You've got a mustache, so you can't pull that off.
Oh gosh.
And when he beats Lou to the scene, he like shoves it in his face. Like, I felt bad for Lou. I was like, no, screw you. No, Joe. Like, come on.
And then at the beginning, when Lou was like, hey, like, do you need someone, like, on your team, like, whatever, and then Joe was just like...
Yeah, I'm not positive that it was Joe he was asking there.
Was it not Joe, or was it just a character that looked like him?
I think that may have... No, you're right. He is asking Joe.
Yeah, that is him. And then Joe is just like... like he just responds in a really mean and rude way and laughs at him.
Yeah, but this is where like their relationship gets a little interesting, because like Joe initially is just like, this guy's an amateur, and then Lou beats him to the scene, and then he offers him a job. He's like, Lou is competition. Like, I think he even says like, why compete with each other when we could like work together and do more? And Lou's like, no, like, you just admitted to me that I'm a threat, so like that's like confirmation to him. I should run with this.
Yeah.
So one other thing that I think is somewhat interesting with this is he doesn't have to beat Joe, or he doesn't have to film Joe's crash to like get him out of the way. He does it. He seems to do it as like payback, like giving Joe the finger.
Yeah.
The one thing that I have a problem with, this is like the main gripe I have with this movie, which is small, but I would have preferred that there was some kind of backlash for doing that, because in that scene, Lou's like missing the bigger story of the moment. I think like Rick says, "Oh, like why aren't we going to that?" Because Lou knows that like when he hears the report on the police radio, like that's the crash, so he goes to get it. I just felt like he should have felt some consequences for that. We have touched on like Lou does bad things and doesn't suffer the consequences for it, but that just would have felt consistent.
Yeah.
And that especially because later that night he gets like the big story, so he never really feels the impact. I would have preferred to see him like get some kind of consequences for that. That's a small gripe, though.
Because it's almost unrealistic that he keeps getting away with all of this.
Well, not even getting away with it. I just feel like he should have felt some professional backlash, like from missing that other story.
Right.
That felt like it was consistent with the world of this movie. Like he made the kind of personal decision there, so he should have suffered somewhat professionally, and he doesn't.
Yeah.
It even really helps him. Okay, so that about covers it for like minor characters.
So crime news culture.
So crime news culture is the next one. So this is kind of what I like to call the world of the story. So this is sort of the thing that like makes things like it kind of gives a feel to the world. So most of that I think is created through the things that kind of go on in the background. So the police scanner, the noise we hear on that, and then the news broadcast. So all of these in the scripts, this is more of an on the page choice, but they're in italics. So it's stuff that we hear in the background, and if you look from like what's in the script to what you hear in the movie, it's pretty much exactly the same. Like he didn't just like throw in some lines to like fill the space. But we don't really have to understand what's being said on the police radio, but it like gives more of a texture to it. We know Lou knows what it is, which I think is like a good choice. It's a small one, but it's better than like in sci-fi movies where it's like Jurassic Park, where they're like explaining how like they made the dinosaurs, and we're all like, okay, why are you even bothering? We know this isn't real.
Yeah.
Like and he doesn't do that here. He's just like, okay, this just makes it feel a little more grounded in reality. I think it takes the movie up a notch. So that's kind of a smaller note for this. But one thing that I noticed a lot in this movie, and we'll talk about this when we do Gone Girl later too, is that like stories that Lou gets, they check boxes that gain viewers' interest. So not all of these crimes that he's doing are created equal. There are things that like spark interest more. So there's a couple lines. Lou says to Rick on their first night, "We want victims and not the kind that live on 6th and Rampart." And then Lena says like, "A carjacking in Compton, that's not really news now, is it?"
And at one point Nina really quickly says also like make sure they're white or something.
Yeah, it's like
because she doesn't, and you know, like as terrible as that is, it's true. Like that is the news world. Like you never hear.
Yeah, it's because I think it's supposed to be sort of an anomaly, which I guess it's not really an anomaly if they're trying to get that every night.
Right.
But like that's the better story. Like the one that Lou gets in the middle is golden. It's like I think it's like 2 Mexican guys storm like 2 white people's like like a white house in like a really good neighborhood. I think it's like upper middle class. Like
Were
the
they
house
Mexican?
scene. Yeah, they were, or like they were like Hispanic. I mean, Lou's pretty specific about that. And there's even that story's like golden for a few reasons, really, but like that's one of them. And there's even a point where I think when he's negotiating the price with Nina about that story, they bargain for price using this. Let's see what. Okay, here we go. So he says, "I got $5,000 for the food truck stabbings." She says, "There were more dead." And he says, "Those were poor Mexican people in a roach coach. 2 of them were illegals. These are 3 wealthy white people shot and killed inside their mansion including a suburban wife shotgunned in her bed. So like there's certain things that are more valuable, and that's interesting to see.
It's upsetting, and it's a mirror to the actual news culture.
Yeah, it kind of is. And so here's another thing that I really wanted to talk about that I think is very interesting because of the time this movie came out. So this came out like late 2014. And if you look at what was going on then compared to what was going on now, like I don't think if this movie came out right now, it would feel as consistent. I think people would feel like, oh, you didn't address like race-driven crime, but I don't, correct me if I'm wrong because I wasn't paying attention to the news that much then anyway, but I don't remember hearing about like Black Lives Matter, or definitely not like the Me Too movement now. That definitely wasn't a thing back then. And even like the 2016 election, like everything that's kind of taking taking up attention in the news now, that wasn't a thing really I mean, two of those things I listed off definitely weren't. I don't know about Black Lives Matter, whether that was a like pressing issue in 2014, but I just think like it's really cool that this came out before. Like there's a line that Lou has where he talks about like crime news gets 14 times whatever else, and immigration's one of the things that's in 22 seconds. Like immigration isn't there anymore, I don't think. Like that has its own thing. So I just think it's interesting that when this movie came out, there probably would have been more attention given to these kinds of like smaller crime stories than there is now. I mean, do you feel like that's fair to say? Like the popularity of these kinds of random crime stories has gone down in lieu of like these bigger.
Well, yeah, events. I mean, yeah, like back then, I don't think there were like. I don't know. I don't really, I can't even speak that much of that, because I don't really watch the news, but honestly, I think it's interesting because, now, thanks, to these really good movements like Black Lives Matter and like, I don't know, all these organizations against ICE and stuff like that, like, I feel like in our day and age, the
news is a little more relevant to stuff. Maybe like this isn't like
exactly
all the crimes in these movies. It's like
a stabbing and like a shooting and like stuff like that. And
it's like trying to be HBO for the
news.
It's more entertainment.
Exactly, and like I don't think, I don't think, at least like in 2014, I don't know. I didn't really see. Just from the few news stories I around Philly, I didn't really see anything that was just like political or like.
Yeah, and I don't feel like I was hearing anything about that back then either. However, I would argue like maybe the list has changed since then, but like I don't know that the way that we relate to news has changed that much. There's still basically, in terms of like random stuff like this that isn't connected with like a longer form story. Mm-hmm. I don't think we're still checking boxes to gain people's attention. Like,
right.
If like school shootings, like if it's in a certain school or whatever, or if it's race related, like that's boxes that are checked that will gain people's interest. Yeah. Granted, I think it's fair to say maybe that they're a bit more relevant. Like, these are pressing issues that people can do something about and that have an effect on their lives a lot more than just these random kind of like a car crash. That's not a big deal at all. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't like a car crash is like, that's kind of like the HBO news thing. Like it's gore. It's like gratuitous gore for the sake of gratuitous gore. Right. It's not informing anyone.
But, one line that Nina does say is like what, I mean, this isn't a perfect quote from it, but a summary of what she said was just basically like, she was like, you want people to be scarred, basically. You want people to be like stunted.
Yeah, I think she says that I want something people can't turn away from.
Exactly. And like, I think that's very relevant even now. Like, I mean, yeah, look at the news and they exaggerate everything. Why? In order to get people to really be like shocked and keep it in their minds. Like,
right, but at a certain point, it's like, I guess this is getting a little bit more into like modern news culture, right? But like, yeah, I mean, we could talk about that for a while too.
Right. Yeah. For the sake of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need to.
Sorry to deviate there.
No, it's fine.
So a couple other quick things. Well, one might not be quite so quick. I guess you know what. To continue on that, like to keep it like somewhat in on the topic we were just on. This is something that Dan Gilroy has brought up in a couple of interviews. So I talked about this a little bit earlier. He says, like, we have created the world that rewards a person like Lou, and that viewers are complicit in Lou's success. Like, we're the demand. Like, KWLA is successful because they get viewers that come back and want these kinds of stories.
Right.
I don't really know how to feel about that. I mean, I don't watch the news, but I'm sure I'm complicit in, like, other people's success in other areas. I think that's an interesting thing to think about. I would agree with the idea that like we as consumers drive the success of people up top, and maybe as one consumer you don't have a whole lot of power over that. But like if we all stopped using iPhones, Apple would have to go out of business. Now that's not going to happen, but like I mean I don't think I could do that. But
Yeah.
it is like if we stopped watching these things, then Lou kind of tanks.
Well, I mean, yeah, and when he was grabbing dinner with Nina, he even said that he was like, your news station is the least one of the least watched, which is
Yeah, so that's I wasn't thinking of that. So that's why she wants these big stories. That's yeah.
because
I didn't think of that.
it's really like they have very low ratings, and that's true. Like it's all about the views.
Yeah,
It's all
and they also want to get like there's the big story of the night, and they all want that one.
Yeah.
Which I think is, I mean, that seems to be true today. Like you could get the same news story if you could get the same news story from like hundreds of sources. Like at the moment that we're recording this, so let's say October 6th, like everyone's pushing the Kavanaugh hearings right now. When we listen to this like a year down the line, we might be like, oh, forgot about that one.
Yeah.
But right now that's the big thing at the moment. Like
Right.
everything, like I mean our school newspaper's pushing that, and I would think that like I mean SNL did a big thing on it last week, which I don't know if that's any indication, but like everyone is talking about Kavanaugh at the moment, and then once something else comes up, they'll all switch to that.
Yeah.
I mean that's just what's been happening. So that feels that feels pretty consistent though with the way that they treat like stories in the movie. We did kind of deviate there again a bit. I have one last point though, and then we'll move on to the last topic. So this is more of a good writing technique, I think. We learned really early on that getting there first and getting something that nobody else has is really important. Like
It's what it attract. It's what.
well,
attracts.
it's what's important for Lou. Like in the first scene that he's doing stringer work. This is actually a pretty good segue because I talk about this in the next topic, which is revealing character through action. So in the first scene that Lou's doing stringer work, there's another stringer that's like holding back and filming the scene. Lou goes further and like he kind of ends up shutting things down, but he gets footage that the other guy doesn't have. And then when he goes to Nina, she's like, "Oh, we already got that," and he said, "No, I got closer." So he has like an instinctive. He understands that like he can't just follow suit with that guy. He has to do more if he's going to get ahead.
Exactly.
And that ends up being really important. If you beat like there's a couple scenes where they beat the police and that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Like if you can get there first and get something someone else doesn't have, like
Right.
people will listen to your thing more than someone else's.
Right.
So that's crazy valuable. But from more of a writing standpoint, that's good that they set that up early because that gives more weight and like makes it that gives more context for when he does the big story at the end, and we know he has like something that nobody else is going to have and like huge things that no one else is going to have. Like if he'd gotten there after the police set up the crime scene in that house, that's completely different. He gets it like right after it happened. So that's set up by like stuff earlier in the movie, which is, I mean, I think that's done to good effect. So that's pretty much the end of the crime news culture, and now we're into like revealing character through action. So this is a little bit less of a theme and more of a writing for a character. So one thing that's, I mean, we this is kind of more of something you see a little more with villains, I think. We don't know a whole lot about his past and his upbringing. So sometimes you need like that motivation for either a hero or a villain to kind of make them grounded. Lou doesn't really have that. So one thing that I didn't really intend to talk about it with this, but like he doesn't have a motivation to get his money. Like you see with some things like Walter White in Breaking Bad. He like we see him doing all these terrible things, but it goes back to he needs this money to like pay for his cancer treatment or whatever. Lou doesn't have anything like that. He like we can see he kind of does need money. Like he lives in kind of a crappy apartment. He's unemployed, but there's like we don't feel that very much. We just see him pursuing it. And we don't really know a lot about him. We just see him doing things, and that tells us about him. So one thing I noticed the first time I was watching this, like Lou doesn't really have an arc. The arc is more what we learn about him throughout. He doesn't change. We just see him doing things that like prove who he is more, which is why I think it's a good technique that Dan Gilroy doesn't like bother with giving him a motivation. It's just what we see him doing.
Right.
So the first of these pretty much is like when he steals the bike and sells it. So that's a specific thing. So he's not like he doesn't have any problem with stealing things. Two, he steals something that like doesn't directly get him money, but he knows he's a good enough salesman that he sells that bike to get the police scanner. I don't know how much that bike's really worth, but he sells it for $800. So he's good enough at like being a salesperson, and we see that throughout the movie that like he chose to get something he could sell instead of stealing money directly or whatever, like doing credit card fraud, something like that.
Because he isn't good enough. And see, it kind of goes back to the murder of if whether or not he would murder Rick. I just don't think he's good enough.
In what way?
In the sense that
he's not a good enough criminal.
He's not good enough criminal in many ways.
You know, that's a good point because like he's more about persuasion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
he would freak out. He wouldn't know what to do. Like I don't think he's that stable because remember even in that scene when he like lost it in his apartment.
With the mirror smash.
Right before, you know, like he knows his limits. He knows when he himself can't handle something or can't like I don't know. I think he like pushes himself, but like I think there is a certain like he knows he can't steal cash. He knows he can't actually murder someone.
Yeah. Well, I was talking a little bit. I mean, that's a fair point. I was talking a little bit more about like this is character specific, and it's kind of like I think it's within like the first 10 minutes of the movie that he does this. Mm-hmm. So like that's a good way to show like setting him apart from like other characters we've seen in other movies.
Yeah.
So another major action that like is revealing of character is when he messes with the Mayhem van. Like I just noticed this because this feels like an action that a villain would do. Like I feel like I've seen villains in other movies do this. Like I know it's a weird like people don't really like this movie, but like in the Phantom Menace when I think Sebulba the alien dude that like Anakin races, he like messes with some other guy's pod or like he chucks a wrench into the motor or something. So like but he's the villain in that scene, and that's basically what Lou's doing here.
Well, we see that in cartoons too. I mean, like
exactly. But it's like it's the bad guy that does it.
And it's insane because or not insane, but it's interesting because he's like the protagonist, but like he's also the antagonist.
Right. So but this is why it's interesting to see him do these things.
Right.
There is something a little bit lacking, I think, in the fact that he doesn't have a motivation, because there's a few moments, like, I felt like the second half of the movie dragged a little bit because of that, because he's getting this story, but we kind of don't feel the stakes of it. Like, the story's a big deal, but it was a little hard for me to stay invested in it, because there wasn't anything driving it. Like, if he didn't get that story, what happens? Like, there's no real tragedy there. I think the movie still works, it's good for this character because he's like driven by success as an end in itself. But it does kind of give it a little bit like it's understandable why you need that motivation for most characters because it's harder to get on board. But it is very specific for Lou that he doesn't have that. Let's see, did I have anything else I wanted to talk about here? No, I think I've pretty much covered that. So, if you have anything else you want to discuss for it, I mean, this is the end of the topics I meant to cover.
Yeah. Cool. No, I guess just like, yeah, overall, like, what did you think of this movie? What have you thought? You saw it a while ago.
I did, yeah. So I saw it when I was like, so it was like a year after it came out. So we're recording this in 2018, so I saw it in 2015, I guess.
Right.
And then I watched it again to do this analysis. But I remember being pretty interested in it the first time.
Yeah.
This is one of, like, I'm not usually impressed by performances. I thought Jake Gyllenhaal did an amazing job with this. And that is partially credit, I think, to Dan Gilroy writing it. So one thing that I noticed is, so the mirror smash scene that you were talking about a couple minutes ago, that's not in the script.
Really?
Yeah, if you look through, like, I would assume that's improv, since it's not in there, and pretty much everything else in the movie is like word for word off the script.
Right. I realized that because I was like looking through and I was like, oh, like maybe like, I don't know, this version, like they didn't, you know.
No. Well, that's a fair point, but like, because a lot of times there is a difference between like even like the final shooting script and what's actually in the movie.
Yeah.
However, that moment isn't in it, but I would still say that, like, I mean, credit given to Jake Gyllenhaal for sure for coming up with that, but Dan Gilroy also made a character who would believably do that, and who Jake Gyllenhaal could get deep enough into to think to do that scene. If we're looking at it as like, so when I first reviewed this movie, I called it Taxi Driver for the Digital Age, and I'm actually not the only person to make that comparison. I found out recently. So if we want to look at that, like the iconic scene of Taxi Driver was like you talking to me. That's also improv. So I think I mean, if you can make that comparison to like an icon of cinema, then I'd say that's very good credit to Dan Gilroy and Jake Gyllenhaal for like bringing this character to life.
Yeah, I think after discussing this, like I know at the beginning of this episode I was just like, not my favorite, but digging deeper, I think
yeah,
you
this
start
is
to
definitely a
appreciate
movie
it.
that so I'm glad you brought that up, because that's kind of a lot of what I want to do with this podcast is like,
appreciate.
Eventually, we're gonna get into movies that we don't like, which might be fun to rip it apart. But the first like 15 that I've chosen are ones that I really like, and the more I get into them, the more I appreciate them. Which is like, I think that's a mark of a good story that's been well constructed.
Right.
But
yeah, so. I think I hope you guys liked it. Hope you guys enjoyed what we had to say.
If you want to write in with anything, like comments about this, whether you agree or disagree with any points, or like how you feel about your relationship to the news compared to the way that this movie presents it,
to the characters,
that would be good fodder to talk about and like follow up on other episodes. If you want to contact me, I'm not on social media, but like email. I'm not on any social media.
I'm on social media, so just contact us. We'll definitely be putting I don't know, some form.
Yeah,
email.
we'll put links on the platforms that we distribute this on. At the moment, we don't really have any, but probably SoundCloud, maybe iTunes. Fingers crossed.
Right.
But for the moment, you can email me at erw58@drexel.edu. That's pretty much the way to do it, and we'll put links also to the script, and I'll try to put links to some of the like videos and podcasts that I listened to in preparation for this.
Right.
So if you have anything else to add before
no, I think this is it. Thank you guys for tuning in.
Also next week is going to be Frances Ha.
Yes.
That's going to be our next episode. It's on Netflix right now if you want to watch it.
That was my pick.
Yeah.
Very excited to do that.
Hopefully I'll find some good things to say about it. I don't really have anything bad to say about it, but at the moment don't have a lot. So that'll be our next one. After that, at the moment we're planning to do Gone Girl is the next one if you want to go even further ahead, and then The Dreamers, which
that's another pick of mine.
So Gone Girl was my pick. And then after that, also you're welcome to write in with suggestions. We're gonna have to get better at like listing these things off for later podcasts, but you're welcome to write in with suggestions for movies you want us to do later on.
Please don't be shy, but thanks guys for listening. Again, I'm Carla Cortez.
And I'm Evan Westman, and this is Interior Analysis, a podcast analyzing screenplays in depth.